Well, good morning, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim. We continue our journey with Christian and Hopeful, and today we start with Chapter 11, Part 7, Seized by Giant Despair. Not far from the spot where they were sleeping was a castle called Doubting Castle. The owner of it was Giant Despair, and it was on his property that they were sleeping. The giant got up early the next morning, and walking up and down his grounds, he spotted Christian and Hopeful sleeping there. Then with a fierce, threatening voice, he woke them up and demanded where they had come from and what they were doing on his property. Christian and Hopeful answered shakily that they were pilgrims and that they had lost their way. Then said the giant, "You have committed an offense against me by trampling in and lying on my property last night. Therefore you must come with me." So they had no choice but to go with him, because he was much stronger than they. They also had little to say on their own defense, since they knew they were guilty. The giant forced them to walk in front of him until they reached the castle. There he threw them into a very dark dungeon, which the two men found disgustingly foul and smelly. They lay there from Wednesday morning until Saturday night, without even a crumb of bread or a drop of water. There was no light at all, and they had no one to ask what would become of them. They were, therefore, in a very evil situation, far from all friends and acquaintances. Christian felt doubly sorrowful, because it was his ill-advised haste that had brought them into this distress. Chapter 11, Part 8. Distrust's Persuasions. Now Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Distrust. When the giant went to bed, he told his wife that he had taken a couple of prisoners and cast them into the dungeon for trespassing on his grounds. Then he asked her what else he should do to them. She asked who they were, where they were from, and where they were going, and he told her. Then she advised him that first thing in the morning he should beat them unmercifully. So when he got up, he took a wooden club and went down to the dungeon. Even though they never said a word to provoke him, he started ridiculing and insulting them as if they were dogs. Then he beat them fiercely and mercilessly, and he so devastated them that they could do nothing to help themselves. They were unable even to roll over on the floor. When the giant had finished his attack, he left them there to mourn and grieve in their misery and distress. That entire day was spent in nothing but sighing and bitter lamentations. The next night, talking with her husband about them further, and finding out that they were still alive, the giant's wife further advised him to counsel them to kill themselves. So when morning came, he went to them in as fierce a manner as before. Seeing that they were in pain from the beatings he had given them, he advised them that, since they were likely never to come out of that place, their only option would be to do away with themselves immediately. "I am leaving you a knife, a rope, and some poison. You choose by which means of death you prefer. Why should you choose life, seeing that it involves so much bitterness and pain?" They begged and pleaded with him to let them go, but he only glared at them with frightening eyes. Then he rushed at them again. He would doubtfully have killed them himself, but he suddenly fell into one of his seizures, which he sometimes fell into in sunny weather. This caused him to lose the use of his hands for a time. So he once again left them to themselves. Then the two prisoners consulted between themselves as to what they should do. Should they take the giant's advice or not? Chapter 11, Part 7. Hopeful refuses to abandon all hope. "Oh, my brother," said Christian mournfully, "what shall we do? The life we are now living is miserable. As for me, I don't know whether it is best to live like this or to die on the spot. My soul would rather choose to die than to live, and the grave will be easier for me than this dungeon. Shall we live our lives in bondage to this giant?" "Indeed, our present condition is dreadful," replied Hopeful, "and death would be far more welcome to me than to live like this for the rest of my life. But let us reconsider a moment. The Lord of the country to which we are traveling has commanded that we shall not murder anyone. How much more, then, are we forbidden to take this counsel and kill ourselves? Besides, he that kills another can only kill his body, but he who kills himself kills his body and soul together. Furthermore, my brother, you speak of ease in the grave, but you have forgotten the hell where all murderers will certainly go. You know that no murderer has eternal life in him. Let us also remember that all authority does not lie in the hands of Giant Despair. As far as we know, others may have been taken by him, and yet escaped out of his hand. Who knows but that the God who made the world may cause the giant to die, or that at some point the giant may forget to lock us in, or that he may shortly have another seizure and lose the use of all his limbs. And if this ever happens again, I am resolved to take courage like a man, and try my utmost to get out from under his hand. I was a fool that I didn't try to do it before. So, my brother, let's be patient and endure for a while. The time may come that will give us a blessed freedom. But let's not be our own murderers. With these words, Hopeful stabilized Christian's mind. So they continued sitting together in the darkness in their sad and despondent condition. Toward evening, the giant went down into the dungeon again to see if his prisoners had taken his advice. But when he came there, he found that they were still alive, but barely. Because they had been given no food or water, and because of the wounds they had received when he beat them, they could do little more than breathe. Even so, upon seeing them alive, the giant fell into a terrible rage, screaming that since they had disobeyed his counsel, it would be worse for them than if they had never been born. They trembled greatly at this, and I think Christian even fainted. However, when he came to again, he and Hopeful renewed their discussion about the giant's counsel, wondering whether it would be best to take it or not. Now Christian again seemed in favor of doing it, but Hopeful made his second appeal, saying, "My brother, don't you remember how brave you have been before? Apollyon could not crush you, nor could anything that you heard, saw, or felt in the valley of the shadow of death. What hardship, terror, and consternation have you already gone through? And now you are just a bag of fears? You see that I am in the dungeon with you, and I am a far weaker man by nature than you. This giant has wounded me as well as you, and I have no bread or water either. I mourn without the light along with you, but let's exercise a little more patience. Remember how you stood tall at Vanity Fair? You weren't afraid of chains, a cage, or even a bloody death. If only to avoid shame, which is not proper for a Christian to be found in, let's bear up under it patiently as well as we can." It was night time again, and the giant and his wife were in bed. She asked him if the prisoners had taken his counsel. He replied, "They are sturdy rascals. They choose to bear all the hardships rather than to do away with themselves." Then she said, "Take them to the castle yard tomorrow and show them the bones and skulls of those we've already killed. Make them believe that before the week comes to an end, you will tear them to pieces as you have done with those before them." So when morning came, Giant returned to them. As his wife had told him, he took them to the castle yard, showed them the bones, and said, "These once were pilgrims like yourselves, and they trespassed in my grounds as you have done. When I thought it a fitting time, I tore them to pieces. Within 10 days I will do the same to you, so get back down to your quarters and wait." With that he kicked and beat them all the way down to the dungeon. They lay there all day Saturday, in a terrible state. That's the end of our reading for today. Next week we'll pick up with Chapter 11, Part 10, Remembering the Key of Promise. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.